Today we're talking about the Sony a7 IV for wedding photographers. English, man, it's weird.
Keep waving. It's good stuff, man.
Welcome back to the office today. Yesterday we did kind of a general review of the Sony a7 IV, all things, I guess, for more of a general review, travel, landscape, documentary, portraits, that style of thing. Today I'm going to be speaking to you specifically as a wedding photographer and or hybrid video creator. So as you'll quickly realize, I live in Canada. All this footage is from Mexico. And in Canada right now, we're not really having any weddings, unfortunately. So I can't bring this to a real wedding day. I was hoping we would maybe accidentally find ourselves at one in Mexico and I could have given you some test footage, but that didn't happen. I guess wedding's pretty light there. We only saw 2. Usually you're at a hotel, you see like 15 weddings a day. We saw 2 total, and not even the actual wedding, just people wearing hats that said that they either got married or were about to get married. So really excited for summer 2022 when things get back and we're doing lots of photos. I'll bring this to one of those weddings for sure. What I hope that you can do is trust me. I've been to over 1,000 weddings. I've used probably maybe 50, 60 different cameras over that lifetime. And I do know what makes a good wedding photography camera, even if the sample footage doesn't happen to be at a wedding. So hopefully you can kind of trust me a little bit in that, and that this will help your purchasing decision. So the Sony a7 IV really is an incredible all-around hybrid camera. I'm going to get the awkward piece out of the way right now, which is if you, so 4K, no crop, 4K 60, comes with an APS-C crop. So your 35 millimeter lens, you're used to that field of view in full frame. All of a sudden it's cropped in a bit of a bummer. If you are someone that does hybrid films and you are doing a lot of 4K 60 work, that may or may not be a deal breaker for you. I'm not sure. It's definitely something to be aware of. Up until last year, didn't shoot. I was shooting in 1080 60. Now that technology allows me to do 4K 60, I like having the ability to kind of crop in a little bit in post if required ever. If people are doing weird stuff on the edges, I can bring that in and I can still deliver a high quality file. I'm going to say it's not an industry requirement to shoot in 4K 60. The 1080 60 is probably going to be fine, especially with the high quality image that you're getting off of this camera. And a weird thing that maybe this, you may agree with this, you may not agree with this. People on their wedding day, they want to see very, very nice. They want to see themselves looking their best. And when you get that 4K close up and you can see a little bit too much, it's almost a negative thing. And a lot of people may actually prefer seeing themselves in 1080 upscaled to 4K as far as kind of the pixel stretch out. And maybe this makes sense to you. Maybe I'm just like digging for excuses around this, but I think that there is some validity there. So again, just trying to put the information out there so you can make your own decision based on what you think that you need. Now getting into, I guess the points for wedding photography and the reasons to get this camera. The autofocus is incredible. 759 phase detect autofocus points. If anything is on your screen or in your EVF, it's going to find it, identify it. It's going to be in crisp focus. It really is Sony that's been pushing, I would say probably until this year, they were the ones pushing autofocus in mirrorless tech. I would say now finally everyone is closer to a level playing field, and all autofocus systems kind of have their own personalities, and you may work really, really well with Sony and you may hate the Nikon autofocus and they're mirrorless, or you may really, really enjoy the Nikon autofocus and really not connect well with the Sony. It's kind of interesting that autofocuses are all to that point. For me personally, I have used all of them, and while they are a little bit different, you can customize them to be exactly what you want. For instance, as a wedding camera, you can slow the autofocus, the reactivity down a little bit. So if people are walking in front of you and you're trying to capture the thing that it's locked onto, that it's not going to quickly kind of pull out here and try to focus on something a little bit closer, because the autofocus is that quick that it'll just jump around if you let it. So sometimes you have to limit it and make it a little bit slower and less fast than it can be, which is kind of funny that you're actually slowing the autofocus decisions down in this camera in order to make it kind of the more perfect camera for you. I leave this camera on just the automatic full wide AF mode, and I leave eye autofocus on. I've set the back button here, C1, to disable eye autofocus. So if you want to just quickly disable it, say for instance, there's a bunch of groomsmen, somebody's getting a boutonniere pinned on, you want to focus on the boutonniere and not all the dudes in the back. All of a sudden you just hit that button, you just tell the camera what you want it to do, and you can quickly do it. The tracking AF mode is also really good. So if there's something that you specifically want to track and you just select it, and it really will stick with that subject. So if that's maybe a bride or a groom or somebody walking around a cocktail area and you want to grab those kind of over the head shots, you can kind of know, well, we'll talk about the screen in like 2 seconds here. You kind of know that it's doing what you want it to be doing, and you don't have to really babysit the autofocus too much. Now, when it comes to the screen, I love the screen. So I have become very used to using a fully articulating screen now. In the past, I was very, very happy, and I would say maybe from a mechanical and less breakable standpoint, having a non-articulating screen, one that just kind of tilts up, is maybe better for you. I also find it's super annoying. So say for instance, I'm taking photos like this and I just want to tilt my screen just like this. Normally, like on any camera, like an A1, you just pull it up. It's no big deal. On a fully articulating screen, you kind of got to go at the side. You can't just quickly do a motion like that. It just doesn't do that. I would be very excited to see manufacturers start doing cameras in two different versions. So you can buy the Sony a7 IV in, I guess, like articulating screen mode or just regular mode. That would be a really cool thing. And I hope that, I don't know if that'll ever be a thing that happens, but if it does, I would be there for it. So I shoot this pretty much all the time, kind of like this. I also find for wedding photography, for wedding video, maybe more specifically, you attract so much less attention if you're just kind of down like this taking photos or something like this. Not as intimidating as having a big 7200 and looking through here and taking photos. All of a sudden you kind of offset a little bit about that. You can talk to the people. You can be, say for instance, you're doing an engagement session and you're grabbing some beers. The couple can be there and you can be taking photos and you just know that the eye autofocus has got you, that your stuff's going to be in focus. You can kind of be framing, you can be interacting, communicating, and all of a sudden you're going to get actual kind of more real to life images from it. So again, it is a tool. It will help you execute your vision. And I really do feel like this camera lets me get to the spot that I want to be a little bit quicker. 33 megapixels backside illuminated sensor in this camera, and I'm super happy with that. I think that 24 is kind of my happy place for wedding pictures. I definitely don't want 60. I don't want 70 megapixels. I'm happy with 33. I'm happy with 24, somewhere kind of within that. Card space, I guess to speak to that, CF Express Type A card. So it's going to be a new card for you, likely, unless you got a bunch of these, which you probably don't. It's going to be a new card. Benefit is that it's very, very fast and secure. Downside is you got to probably buy a new one. But as you can see in here, there are two card slots. So one's an SD and one is your CF Express Type A. And I think that it is incredibly important as a wedding photographer to be shooting RAW to both, like shoot all your images to both. In the hybrid section of this video, I'll talk about something that I do that gets away from that rule, but just briefly if you need it. But that's to come later in this video. When it comes to battery life for wedding days, I obviously have not used this at a full wedding day, but I have used it out in the sun and the heat and taken lots of photos and lots of video clips, kind of hybrid style throughout the day. And I have been very happy with the battery life. I don't think that I've gone below 50% when I've been out there doing real life things. So it's definitely on par with the Canon R6 or the Nikon Z6 II. Bring two batteries, obviously. I guess the other benefit is that it's very easy to USB-C charge. So if you have a power pack, you can quickly kind of charge your battery over dinner or whatever. You don't got to, my issue with actually putting batteries in a charger and charging them on the wall is that if you've ever been to a wedding, you've ever charged a battery, you've probably left that charger and the battery at the wedding. To have USB-C and just to have it with you and charging all the time is just, it's a much easier and more simple solution for a wedding day. To speak to probably my favorite feature of this camera is the active stabilization. So it's in a few other cameras now, and I assume that it'll continue to come to new Sony cameras. It gives you incredibly stable footage. So it's the IBIS stacked with a little bit, I would assume, of electronic kind of IBIS as well, but it doesn't feel like that. So it's not the crappy one that's you're gonna see the warped edges. It just feels very, very nice. And for handheld footage, for handheld wedding day video hybrid coverage, it is really a dream. It's not quite to the level that a GoPro, if you ever used one of the newer GoPros, it looks like you're on a gimbal and you're like, how is this tiny camera doing this? It's not quite at that level yet. If you walk and you step hard, you're gonna kind of break the active stabilization. But if you are being reasonable with it, it's just gonna deliver you absolutely incredible stable footage that you're going to be very happy with. When it comes to frames per second for wedding photographers, I am super happy with it. So the spec sheet says 10, and that's if you're doing a compressed file. If you're at lossless, a full non-compressed file, you're getting more like 6 frames per second, which I think is totally fine for wedding days. I don't use above that. I know that's been a thing that a few people have mentioned on past camera reviews, like, are 4.5 frames per second enough? And my answer is yes. I rarely, if ever, even shoot the cameras that I shoot on high frame rate mode. I usually slow them down to be somewhere between 4 and 6. And I find that that is kind of my happy spot. So I would say that this definitely checks the box for frames per second. When it comes to video, it does kind of the most video you could, it does 4K, 422, 10-bit, and it's amazing. The footage looks incredible. And you're gonna look at the video on a full screen and you're gonna be blown away by it. I personally shoot usually 420, 8-bit because I don't do too much grading in post-production. And when I am using these cameras, I'm actually shooting on Cinetize Cinetone. So it's one of the picture profiles built in. S-Log 2, S-Log 3, they'll give you maybe a little bit more dynamic range overall. But I like the fact that Cinetone is pretty much what I want to deliver at, that I don't need to really add too much of a LUT. I can maybe adjust some things. I can do a little bit of color work in post, but I don't really have to do a whole lot, that it's pretty much just ready to go. The way that the highlights roll off, everything with that picture profile, I feel like they really nailed it, and I am super happy with it. That said, that's what I do. That doesn't have to be what you do. You can shoot S-Log, you can shoot standard, whatever it might be. That's just kind of what I have found to be the best. One other thing I'll mention, the camera does not overheat from what I've experienced even out in the hot sun. What it will do is it'll actually get really quite hot. So if you are recording a lot of 4K clips and you're in the hot environment, if you're doing a wedding in Florida, you are going to notice that this camera does get quite hot. So just something to be aware of. That said, it got hot, but it never gave me the overheat warning or put me in any sort of weird nervous position where you see a thing that starts blinking. This camera really, it did well. It exceeded expectations, especially in Mexico where it's hot and humid and we're out in the sun, we're on a boat. Yeah, you get it. Next up, very helpful, the mic door is its own dedicated, and it's like, if it's a very firm, hard piece of plastic, I would assume. I don't know my materials. It's a very firm door and it has just a dedicated mic port. What I don't love in most of the other cameras that I use is that all of them, it's like you open up one, it's like you get the mic and you get the headphones and maybe something else. And just like, no, I use the mic all the time. I use the headphones rarely. So that door on its own, it's really, really awesome. When it comes to ergonomics, very, very happy with it. So I basically set this customizable button up here in the top corner to be my ISO. So I have ISO, I have shutter speed, and I have my aperture on the front here. Gives you everything in a very easy to handhold way, with the record button also being in a very nice spot. If you are coming from a different camera brand, you'll hit this C2 button a bunch of times to try to record things because that's where your finger naturally lands. So if that is a thing, you can just map that to actually be your record, start, stop. For high ISO performance, very, very happy to go up. I mentioned this in the video yesterday that if you're shooting an f1.4 lens, and you're going above 12,800 ISO, you are in literally an impossible environment. You're in the dark. I would say that I am very happy to use this camera at 12,800 ISO, or maybe a little bit above if required. But to be in a situation shooting with an 85 1.4 at 1.4, you'll probably never need above 12,800 ISO. It's just kind of an unreasonable thing. So if you are like, oh, well, like this camera really falls apart at 35,000 or 102,000 ISO, I don't know if these are actually ways that it scales. I wouldn't say it's important to do too many comparisons on that. The Sony a7 IV will get you to where you need to be on a wedding day. And unless you're trying to shoot an f4 lens in the dark, then maybe you do need that expanded ISO performance. But I guess best working case, the thing that you should be doing is shooting the appropriate lens for the thing and 12,800 ISO. Totally, totally good. The shutter blades come down to protect the sensor when you do open it up. Don't touch them because they're very, very delicate. And that's why brands haven't given us the ability to do that, because poke them and then you got to send it in for repair to fix your shutter blades. And they'll just send you a note like, stop touching your shutter blades, idiot. So that's great. For me as a wedding photographer, I do find myself changing a lot of lenses throughout the wedding day, and also in environments that maybe might not be ideal. You're doing a destination wedding, you're out there on the beach, or maybe you're in a dusty environment. Maybe you're doing, I don't think you would do photos in a construction site, but you might. I have. You don't have to. But anyways, that'll help keep some of the dust off the sensor for you, and so you don't have to swab. Bring swabs though, just in case you notice anything. Also, I always shoot at 1.4, so I never see any sensor dust. My sensor could look like anything. For colors, this is definitely something that a lot of people have talked about in the past, that they just don't love the Sony color palette. I find that with the Cinetone color palette, even in photos, I shoot it both in video and photo, I'm very, very happy with it. The raw file itself, obviously you're gonna have presets, you're gonna change colors around a little bit. It does give you a very good environment to work from in the beginning. And I will say that overall, the files are quite nice to work with. One tip, one thing that I would, if I could have made this the title of the video, I would make sure you select your white balance. I discovered that when running auto white balance, it would never really give me exactly what I wanted. But as soon as I went into cloudy mode or shade mode, it started giving me the color palette that I really, really love. So maybe experiment around a little bit with that. Again, you can change all these raw files in post-production, but at least for me and trying to generate as minimal work in post-production as possible, just setting my white balance really took my colors from something I was like, yeah, that's good enough, to something I'm like, wow, quite happy with that. Now moving into, I guess the most important thing for hybrid shooters is how fast you can take a bunch of photos and then switch and start recording video mode. In the past, Sony cameras have not been good at this, that it's taken, especially if you're on like something big megapixel like the A7R4, sometimes it's maxed out and it's like 99 seconds writing to card, and it's trying to write the things. And this is even with fast cards sometimes. I guess the nice thing to tell you is that with the addition of the CF Express Type A card, it is incredibly fast. So your slow piece is this SD card. You can get as fast SD cards as you can. Unfortunately, it's still going to be a little bit slower than the CF Express Type A. And in my experience, in a lot of tests, I would say more than good enough in most situations. So if you're, say, for instance, doing getting ready coverage and it's not like you have to take 25 photos really fast and switch to video mode, it's going to be totally fine. The situation that I kind of described yesterday in the review is that if a couple, they just got married, they're walking down the aisle and people are throwing flower petals or whatever, taking a bunch of photos, you got like 10, 20, 30 photos, you want to make sure you get the right photo, and you're also doing video coverage. And at some point, you got to make the call to switch to video, which is amazing because you just hit this button. That's all you do. You just hit the button. But if you take 20 photos and you switch to video mode, it is going to give you a little bit of a countdown. If you're trying to write the raw files to both cards, it might be a significant countdown. If you're taking a lot of photos, it's very easy to take a lot of photos with this camera. The workaround that I found that is more than good enough. The newer, I'm not sure if it came with the new menus, but you can separate your cards so only raw files shoot to the main card and JPEGs only shoot to the second card, or video files as well if you want. But basically by splitting that up and only writing JPEGs in those situations where you know it's going to be that really fast switch from photo to video and you're going to be doing a lot of photos and you need those videos, I would suggest switching that to JPEG only to speed up that process. So basically it's just going to write everything incredibly fast. You're going to be able to record video. Your life is going to be very good. You're not going to miss any moments. Everything's going to be in focus because it's a Sony camera. Not everything. The focus point will be in focus, and maybe if you're shooting with a 1.4, background will be not in focus, but you get what I'm trying to say. Anyways, this does keep up with that slight workaround for maybe that 3% of the day that you would need it. Other than that, I would just leave it shooting raw files to both cards, and you probably won't ever discover it being a problem. And as I mentioned quickly there, whenever you're in photo mode, you can just hit the record button. And it's not going to do something like the Canon R6 where it just launches you into automatic video mode where you have no controls. It's going to give you full controls of your footage. And if you are someone that's taking your hybrid footage to the next level, sounds like I'm selling you a course. If you are using a screen, it comes with a full-size HDMI, which is very, very nice to have and not something that I would have expected to see on this camera, to be honest. Full-size HDMI cables, in my experience, just a heck of a lot more reliable than the little tiny guys and trying to get the little foot cage thing. I don't even know what they're called, in order to stabilize it. Just easier, full-size HDMI. If you're using a screen, you're gonna be very, very happy. So overall, as a hybrid camera, if you're not someone that's going to be using a lot of 4K 60, I would say that this is an incredible tool for you to pick up. If you are using 4K 60 and you're okay with the crop, then obviously this is a great camera for you as well. I would say for me, at least from my use with the A7 III, to come to this, the autofocus is worth the additional upgrade, especially as a camera you're going to be using kind of all day. So even though the A7 III, I believe, is still actually for sale, it's still a current product, I would definitely kind of push you for this simply for how good it is really in every situation. And your autofocus, like if you're coming from a digital SLR and this is the first mirrorless camera you get, your mind is going to be absolutely blown. When I look back on my past work, I can tell which images were shot with digital SLR and which were shot with mirrorless simply because of the fact that I had to drag my stupid focus point around. I just shot single focus point, autofocus continuous. And I can tell when I framed an image because that's where like the highest that I could get my autofocus point to. Whereas with mirrorless, rather than making your composition about what you can kind of put in focus or focusing and recomposing, you can just set up your frame and just hit the button and your camera's in pretty much every situation going to make the absolute correct decision for you. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any other questions, feel free to put them in the comments below. Happy to get back to anything that I can. If not, I know there's usually a lot of Sony people kind of in the comments, or if it's an advanced question, I can always reach out to somebody that will know the answers for you. That is all for this video for the Sony A7 IV. See you again another time. I'm Taylor Jackson. And I don't know how to end my videos.